Welcome to the Leadership Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Jono White. I'm the founder and principal consultant of Clarity. We are an Australian-based consultancy that works with leaders around the world, and our passion is to invest in people to become everything they're meant to be in order to fill the world with healthy organizations that people love to work for and customers line up to buy from. The goal of this podcast is to invest in you and your leadership. If you're just joining us for the first time, then feel free to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, the most popular being our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from around the world in all different sectors give their in-depth answers on leadership, what books they love, what they found most challenging, the most meaningful stories, how they structure their time through the day. That's free, so go and check it out. And we'd love to interview you about your leadership. I believe you have advice from your experience, your context, and your life so far that is important and can help other leaders. It's also a great way to give back. It's free to get involved, and you can do so by going to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or just Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form that pops up. We have a free resource for you on our website. It's called Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook. It has interviews with 10 world-class leaders, and you can go to consultclarity.org. It's right at the top, and get that today. We also have a daily email that we send out to over 15,000 leaders, and that email contains the highlights, our best content from our podcasts, our blog, my book, the books that we're loving that are out there about leadership. It's also the best way to get access to our masterclasses and workshops before anyone else. And there's also exclusive and limited special options just for subscribers. And you can subscribe by going to consultclarity.org/subscribe. Now, my gift to you is to work incredibly hard to provide the best leadership content I can to invest in you and your leadership. So if you're finding our content helpful, if you find this podcast helpful, then your gift to me could be this. If you do find it helpful, then write a review or rate our content and make sure you subscribe or follow. I can't emphasize enough how helpful that is. It really does help us to get the word out there so we can invest in more leaders to become everything they're meant to be. It also means a lot to me personally when people like you and people in our community share our content on social media. So if you do that, then please do look for me, Jono White, to tag me, and look to tag Clarity on whatever platform you're on. And our team, including me, I'm always looking to see when people have mentioned us so that I can engage with you. And also we look at sharing content. So if you write something about something we've done, there's also a good chance we'll share that with our followers. So if you could do that, that is a massive, massive help as we try to invest in as many leaders as we can around the world. Last of all, you can check out my book about how to deal with difficult people even if you hate conflict. It's called Step Up or Step Out. It's available on Amazon. You can just look up Step Up or Step Out Jono White, or you can go to store.consultclarity.org/book and check it out there. I have coached leader after leader after leader, and in more than 50% of the sessions, this topic comes up. How do I deal with this person? I'm finding it really difficult, and I just want to find a way that doesn't blow up to just to have a difficult conversation, to lead them better. How do I do that? There's a 3-step process that I outline in this book that I believe can help you. Okay, let's get into today's episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Enjoy. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast. Today's guest is Liam Mayo. Liam is the CEO and Managing Director of Comlink Australia. Welcome to the podcast, Liam.
G'day, Jono. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to talk to you today.
Yeah, I'm pumped to hear some of your story. Before we get into that, tell us a little bit about what you do at Comlink Australia and what you do in your role as CEO and Managing Director.
Thanks, Jono. Look, Comlink Australia is an organisation that has the absolute privilege of walking the journey with Australians as they age at home and in their communities. So we support people to stay at home as long as possible as they age. We do in-home aged care support for people, as well as transport for those people who are aging and unable to drive any longer. So we help them to connect to their community as they're aging. We're based on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, but we service all the way up the coast as far north as Cairns and as far west as Toowoomba as well. And we like to think of ourselves as the regional and rural specialist at in-home and community care, because we believe that it's those smaller communities that really benefit services like ours. So we're a not-for-profit organisation. We've got a turnover of about 27 mil a year. And somewhere between 350 to 400 full-time staff and volunteers, depending on what activities we've got going at different times in the year. So it's my privilege to lead that organisation. I really enjoy working in community, and in particular working with people who, without services like ours, would be somewhat isolated or vulnerable in the community. So it's good to keep those people connecting, because I think it's important for us as a community to reflect on what it means to support people when they're at their most vulnerable.
Yeah, I think what you do for exactly the reason you just mentioned about supporting people at their most vulnerable, I really believe you're in one of the most important sectors there is, and I think it's also an area culturally where we can do so much better. So I love hearing about leaders who are passionate about this area and really prioritizing and caring for people at their most vulnerable, when they're in the older stage of life.
Yeah, yeah, and I do. You genuinely, I think it's really important, and we're here to talk about leadership, but I think it is important for leaders to frame the work that we're doing in this space as a privilege. We in Australia have recently had a Royal Commission that told us some fairly harrowing truths around what it means for us to age at home in Australia. And people that we work with, people that we love, people that live close to us, whether they be neighbours or in the community. If you're aging in Australia at the moment and you're looking down the barrel of going into a residential aged care or seeking support from institutions within our community, there's some fairly confronting truths that we heard through that Royal Commission that would make me feel really anxious about that. And we can see that with all of the people that we work with, that ability to navigate their future and the control that they have to navigate their own futures is slowly slipping away from them. And so, what does it mean for us as who work alongside those people and work to support those people to provide them with the ability to continue to maintain their agency? And that's why I mentioned before, it's really important for us at Comlink Australia to position ourselves in those regional and rural communities, because that's where people feel safest. If I've got married, raised my family, worked, lived, retired in a regional community in Australia, I want to stay there as long as I can, because that's where my networks are. That's where I feel most comfortable, and that's where I know I can continue to contribute to my community and I have purpose and meaning. And so I think when we're reflecting on what we do here at Comlink Australia and what my role is as a leader to an organisation that supports those people, it's important to frame it as a privilege, but B, frame it in through that lens that you've just described as we've got to be really and do some really deep reflection, knowing what we know about how we're treating those people culturally, and that we do need to have a significant change in the way we're talking and dealing with these matters and these communities, because it's important for our future, and it's
Yeah.
important for us to think about what we want the future to look like for all of us.
100%. Yeah, I agree with everything you said there, and love your approach and the work you're doing. Let's jump into your story. I want to start with your childhood and growing up. As you reflect on that time of your life, Liam, can you think of any of the moments or even themes from your childhood that really shaped you into the person and leader you are today?
Yeah, I had a really a really interesting childhood, and was fortunate enough to have a fairly rich set of experiences as a child. I grew up as a young boy. I was born in Brisbane, in Australia, but at a very young age, in my primary school years, moved to Fiji. So I grew up in Fiji as an expat kid, but alongside a diversity of different people from different cultures and different nations, different religious beliefs and backgrounds. I went to an international school in Fiji. And then when I reached high school age, I moved to New Zealand, and did my high school years in New Zealand. Again, enjoying the diversity of worldviews and backgrounds of people there that I grew up with. And then when I finished my high school years, set back out, and ended up finding myself back out in Australia. But I've spent a lot of my formative years, and particularly through my early stages of my career, traveling. But as a young child, growing up within communities that were deeply diverse, and for me, being the child that was in the minority, and that was really rare for someone like myself, when we go back to the Western cultures where I'm part of the majority. So as a young child to grow up as the minority, I was exposed to some really interesting experiences about what it would feel like to not be able to speak the language, to be able to understand what the cultural norms were, and how I needed to mold myself and reflect on myself and my practices to help myself fit in. But in school and community with my friends, people I was playing sport with, and I still hold those experiences as really core to how I approach my leadership now today, and how I think about what it means for me to position myself, and the privilege that I have as a leader with the people that lead me, both in my organisation and the community.
Yeah, yeah, that's fascinating, and it's great to understand. Like I always find those sort of stories about moving internationally. Just like because I lived in the one city growing up my whole life here in Brisbane, and I'm still here, so I'm always trying to understand and put myself in the shoes of what it must have been like. Tell me about I guess from your eyes as a child and then as a teenager, what were the biggest differences you experienced, um, from Australia to Fiji to New Zealand?
I think, I mean, it's easy. I mean, the easy answer to say is, that there are those sort of significant cultural differences between the three different nations. Um, but I think for me, fundamentally, when we're talking about culture, we're talking about power dynamics and structures of power, and how those structures of power um, push different values and push different ways of behaving, and different attitudes to the world. And so for me, I was the oldest of three boys. I got two younger brothers. And we became really, really close because we grew up, moving between different countries and different cultures. And the differences that I learned there, really, for me, between those three different cultures, is the lens with which people and those cultures put on family first and foremost. And as you can imagine, in Fiji, it's a very family-centric community. Family comes first, and I now find myself working in the aged care sector and supporting people to age. Those things are it's a given that in Fiji and in Pacific Island communities, that the elderly are cared for by their family. Whereas in Australia, we have institutions to do that, whether they be private or public. In Fiji and Pacific Island communities, it's a given that the family will support aging people. And then I think, zooming out from the family, that real focus on community and strength and power that comes from community, and that community is first and foremost when it comes to thinking about how we go out and we navigate the world. So we have strength in family, strength in community, and then we can go out and we can attack the world and all the things that life has in store for us, challenges and opportunities. They're done from a really strong foundation of family and community. as I sort of moved away from Fiji as a young boy and into New Zealand and then back to Australia, you sort of start to see those foundations of family and community dilute, in the way that I describe, particularly from the lens of aging. It's the most obvious. We don't do that as much here in Australia, but there's also that dilution of community, and community has almost become an artificial sort of construct for us in Australia, and we see conversations around community led by people like politicians, or led by property developers, or led by local governments, rather than led by the communities themselves. And I think, and I don't necessarily think that that's and I don't mean that to sound like a dire situation. I certainly don't mean to make that sound as though there's an erosion of Australian community in a way that's fundamentally exposing people, or exposing the future of Australian society to anything that's more stark that has come before. But I think it's an important conversation for us to have, and an important conversation to reflect on when you've had the opportunity to travel across cultures and across nations, and to pick up learnings from how other people and how other cultures do things, so we can reflect on that as ourselves here in Australia, and within our own communities and families. I'm a young father as well. I got a 6 and a 4-year-old at home, and we talk a lot about. And just last night, we're having a conversation at dinner about what are our family values, and then how do those family values meet the broader community. Both my boys are just starting off at school in kindy, so they're talking about the values that they talk about at school and kindy, and how that reflects. That's their beginning of them understanding a broader community. And so talking about those things and reflecting on those things become fundamental for me, because of the experiences I had as a young child.
Yeah, I love that you're having those conversations about family values, and it's also really fascinating to hear you talk. I think particularly your time in Fiji. Now you must look at, and it's such an interesting part of your journey that must shape some fascinating worldview and perspective, because of being, seeing the way they care culturally for those who are older in Fiji. I love that you were sort of exposed to that at a young age, because now you're leading in this space here in Australia. And I think we have so much to learn. Like, it doesn't have to look the same, but I think we need to learn from other cultures that, I'm married into a Greek family, and I see in a similar way that the Greek culture, really honors and just looks after their elderly differently to our sort of general Western culture.
Yeah. I think it is. I think you're right, Jono, and it is interesting for us to reflect on personally as well, and all of us to reflect on personally the lessons we can learn across culture. But as I said before, I think for me, there's something fundamentally interesting about the structures of power that exist within culture, and I think for example, for me, Fiji in particular, was colonized by the British, and it is still part of the Commonwealth, obviously. But conversations that were happening for me, as a young boy, I was there post-coup in Fiji, so that was where the Fijians really had a view that they wanted to have greater control over their own future. And for me, it's always interesting to reflect on the way that people try to find agency over their own future, and what they will do, and the lengths that people will go to to hold on to agency, to have decision over the future that they want to have for themselves. And again, I mentioned that before, for people who are aging in Australia, and how confronting that must be, and watching that, observing that as a young child in Fiji, what it was like for a community that had a really diverse tapestry of, those who had colonized and those who were colonized, in a small island nation, having really confronting conversations. And like I say, it was a military coup that happened in Fiji, albeit it wasn't a violent coup, but it was about a group of people who had a connection to that country that was far longer than the connection of the colonizers, taking back their control and taking back agency for their future. And that's something that's really stuck with me, and something that I really hold on to and think about, in the work I do. And like I say, it's certainly influenced the way I think about what it means to age, and just recently now in Australia, the new government, that, we're now having conversations about, what it means to become a republic. So we see that emerging at the moment for us in Australia, but we're also having this conversations that are far more confronting, I believe, about our history, right, and a voice to Parliament for our First Nations people here in Australia. For me, we're at a really fascinating point in our history as Australians, because we're talking about, a nation that was colonised, and those power structures that have been in place, and how leaders, and I mean leaders, like lots of leaders from diverse backgrounds, are trying to unpack what that means and what those power structures have been, so they can all find space to create agency for the people that they represent. It's a fascinating time for us to be here, and that's something that stands out for me because of how I grew up.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we fast forward from there, as you mentioned, growing up and having the chance to live in Fiji and then do high school in New Zealand, through that time, or even into your sort of 20s, do you remember one of your first leadership opportunities, the first time you felt you were really in the deep end, leading a group of people, casting vision for a project, or really the responsibility was yours for something, and you were leading something? What comes to mind?
I was really lucky that I got to go and be part of an exchange group that went to Mexico. So I spent 12 months in Mexico doing my undergraduate. So I was 21, I think. I turned 22 while I was there. So I spent a year in Mexico with a group of foreign exchange students, really tight knit. And we were doing some research projects there as part of our undergraduate studies. And I was asked to be sort of like a student liaison, student mentor while I was there, and I was asked to do it, and I didn't really understand why, and I thought it would be a bit of fun. It's always good to meet new people, but what I found that struck me most profoundly and affected me through that time while I was doing that work, and liaising with the different students, and supporting them to connect both, to the community that was there, but also the community back home for them, so they remain linked to their universities. Was I really enjoyed the ability to connecting with people and helping people to navigate sort of really complex challenges or highly emotional challenges that were emerging for them, and using that connection that I had with them to support them through that change, and to understand what was meaningful for them. And so for me, it was about connecting one-on-one with people to help a larger group of people transition through that project, and transition through that length of time that we were there. And I really enjoyed that, and it was a learning that I took away from my time there, and sort of helped me to sort of shape the career that I wanted to have after that.
Were there any lessons you learned in that? Because I can imagine, at that age, doing what you're doing, it must have been incredibly formative. Any lessons that have really stuck with you from leading in that space?
Look, I think, when you're working with people, there's always something to take away, and there's always something to reflect on. For me, there is that. I remember really early on having that realization that your assumptions, or your assumptions about the way people should think, believe, behave, respond to the world around them, are always going to be fundamentally flawed. It's that old saying about you should never assume. And what I learnt through that was this sort of patience to sit with people. And I'm my very disposition is usually to move quite fast, to be impatient. I'm always itchy. I'm always a bit jumpy. but I found that sort of reflecting on that and slowing down and taking time to connect to people and hear from them what their worldviews were, and how their worldviews differed from mine, helped me to understand how I was then able to help them, to navigate the change that was happening around us and was in particular happening for them. So yeah, I think that there is the reflection that everybody has their own experience, everybody has built their own conditioning around those experiences, and it's that conditioning that informs the way they respond to the world. And you can never assume that yours is going to be the same as others. In fact, it never
Mm.
really is. Even when you find people that are similar to you, there's differences that exist there. So I think for me, that leadership lesson of slowing down, even though I want to go fast, and allowing that time to connect, even allowing that time to connect for people, is never time wasted.
Yeah, it's funny. I've learnt a lot doing this podcast. It's probably the best education. I'll say one of the best times of education of my life, from 200 episodes chatting with great leaders and just getting to ask them these sort of questions. And I found it interesting how, like, I always knew and I always believed listening was right up there as really important, but it really has, like, this idea of, like you said, not just listening, but that really, like, paying attention to making sure that people around you feel heard and really, really trying to understand, and that empathy and listening, it comes up almost more than anything else. And I want to ask you, you mentioned there, and I love how you said it, that you are naturally a faster mover. And I know there'll be listeners, some listeners will be slower movers like me, where um, and that's great. But I know there'll be listeners who are going, "Oh wow, yeah, that's me." Maybe they're earlier in their leadership journey and they're just realizing they're naturally a real fast mover. My question is, how do you stay true to yourself, like, and sort of not change in terms of how you're wired, because that's who you are, and, like, how have you managed being naturally a fast mover with taking on board stuff like listening and and slowing down when you need to? How have you balanced that?
Oh, that's a great question, Jono. I think that I think there's the word that's thrown around way too much in this space is authenticity. And I think it's a buzzword that's popped up, and particularly as the world gets more and more transactional. Um, I think that this call for authenticity in leadership is sort of overplayed quite a bit, to the point where it becomes redundant itself and it becomes a transactional term. But I want to use it for the sake of responding to your question, because I've just been talking. We were just talking about this idea of authentic leadership a couple of days ago with a group of friends of mine, and I think you need to get to a point, and it's part of maturity, right? Like it's about, there are things that I am really good at and that I can do for the people around me as a leader, that they're gonna come to Liam and they're gonna say, this is what Liam can do for me, and I know Liam will nail this thing and he does this really well. And there are things that I just can't do for people, or I don't do as well as I wish I could do. And it's just not in my nature, it's not in my disposition. I'll try really hard to do those things, but I won't be able to do it. And I think there's an authenticity that, as you mature as a leader and you spend more time in the space and you have those awkward, cringeworthy, embarrassing moments, those public kind of, where you publicly fall on your face in front of a group of people that you wish you never did. You learn all the time. And I think that authenticity is going, this is where I hit my stride, and this is what I do really well. And the things that I don't do well, I'm just going to name that, and I'm going to own that, and I'm going to be really honest about that. So I put people around me consciously that either compliment me when I'm doing the stuff that I do really well, and they can help me do that better, or pick up on my deficits, and compliment me where I potentially have weaknesses. And I think it sounds really simple, but it's really hard to do, to kind of to find those people and build that team around you, and have that in a circle that you trust. But I think that the easiest step to get yourself there is to reflect and be really authentic about saying, I'm just going to own these are the things that I don't do well. And, my crew know that, my inner circle around me, my team know, I love a half hour meeting. I'm not good. Once we get to 31, 32 minutes into the meeting, I'm getting fidgety. I want to move. I want to go and do other stuff. I'm not great on the go slow, long conversation stuff. And so they respond, and they work with me, and they go, Liam, we need you here for another 30 because we're not there, or let's take a break and come back when Liam's gone off and done something else, and then he's come back, and he wants to hit it again for another 30. And conversely, what they get out of me in that 30 is, white heat. We're there, we're deep, we're working hard, and we're moving, and that's my commitment to them through that. So I think I think to back to your question, and to your point, I think it's about maturing and having a sort of really sophisticated look at yourself and going, there's some things we need to be honest and go, I need to change this about myself. If I want to be a good leader, I need to change this, and I need to work on this, and I need to develop this. But there's also, I think, a real authenticity in saying, these are actually just the things that I do, and this is the way that I'm comfortable to work, and I know this gets results. I'm just going to keep doing this, but where I do have my deficits, I'm going to put people around me, and I'm going to own those deficits, be honest about that with those people, and I'm going to take them on the journey with me. I think that's kind of it, Jono, to be honest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love a bunch of things you said there. Obviously, building the team around you with that perspective, to find people who are really, will really complement your strengths, and those who can really help in the areas where you're aware that you're, that you have weaknesses. But the thing I love most that you said there is around naming it. And I think as a leader, this is like, we underestimate this so much. As a leader, if you can name your own limitations, like you just talked about there. Once it gets to 31 minutes, I'm struggling. So like I'm itching to go and do something else. What you're doing by saying that is, number one, you're modeling to your team, if you have things like this, just speak up. It's okay. And then it makes it like you're giving everyone permission to talk about it. So I find this with teams, just by articulating that to each other. Suddenly, when Liam's checking out a bit in 32 minutes, one of your team can say, Liam, are you, it's past 30 minutes, are you itching for a break? And it kind of gives you language to address what otherwise are some awkward, or can be like it's a big deal. Whereas when you articulate it, and it can just get rid of so much of that tension, and it gives everyone some language to sort of, maybe it's an Aussie thing, but tongue in cheek, sort of almost pay each other out about it, gently, as a way of dealing with it, rather than let it sit unsettled, or blow up.
Oh, you're right, and I think, for those of us who really want to excel in this space and be, and this is probably where the authenticity piece comes in. It's also about providing those people space for them to name the things that they need, and the amount of times I'll finish, a session with one of my team, a one-on-one with my team, and go, okay, what do you need from me? Like, what are the things that you need from me? I think that's the power in this. So as much as it's about me saying, I get itchy feet, I like to move fast, and these are the things that you get to 31 minutes and you're starting to lose me. So keep things short, sharp, and concise. Conversely, it's also about me asking from them, what do you need from me, so I can be my best for you as well, and as long as we're doing that, like, as long as you're getting the light with the shade, then you're really hitting your stride. Then that's the leadership kind of kicking in. Then you're not just being a manager and sort of saying, okay, for me to get my KPIs, I need to do this. So it's the reciprocity and that kind of positioning as well of the conversation. So it's a give and take. I think that's where we're really finding some interesting spaces as leaders.
Yeah, I agree. No, that's so good. Well, let's jump into Leadership Express. There's obviously a lot more of your story we didn't get to, so I'd love to invite you back for a follow up episode, and we can talk more about some of the mentors in your career and some aha moments in more recent years. So the invitation's there to come back at some point.
I appreciate that, John. Yeah, I look forward to that.
For the moment, just so that we do, start wrapping up, I want to ask you some Leadership Express questions. The first one: what is a book that you've gifted to others, or you recommend it to others?
On the Road by Jack Kerouac.
On the Road by Jack Kerouac. Okay, excellent.
Yeah,
Is
have you
that
read it?
No, I haven't. Is it fiction or non-fiction?
Non-fiction, but it's a fantastic and beautiful read
Yeah,
from the 1950s. Yeah, I recommend, and it's that book that every time I see it in a bookshop or
yeah.
anywhere, I pick it up because I know I'm going to give it to someone as a gift. It's a beautiful book.
Oh, such a good answer. No, I haven't had that recommendation and I haven't read it, so I will. I'll definitely check it out. On the Road. Love it. Um, One-on-one meetings. You mentioned this a little bit as we've chatted. What is one tip you'd give to leaders to run great one-on-one meetings?
I think, and I learned this, you mentioned before mentors, I learned this from a mentor of mine, and this is a bit of an extension of what we were just discussing before. Having a set of agreed expectations with those people that you're leading. So
Mm,
turning up and, whether it's the first time you've just hired someone, it's the first one-on-one you're having, or you can have a reset of those one-on-ones by saying, these are my expectations of how our relationship's going to work and how these meetings are going to run. You do the same for me, so they're invited to do the same back for you, and you agree on those expectations, and it creates a great framework for really positive and productive conversations.
yeah, I love that. That's great advice. Do you have any favorite questions you ask, whether you're with the board or you're with other stakeholders or you're meeting with a group of employees or running a workshop? Any favorite questions you like to ask?
Um, Yeah, I think that probably changes. I think that as I mentioned before, I like to finish particularly one-on-ones with my crew or a team meeting saying, what do you need from me so I can ensure that I'm delivering for those people around me. I want to be as much about that servant leadership piece as I am about leading out in front. So what do you need from me? At the moment, I'm really interested in the how question. So how did we
Mm,
reach that conclusion? How did we get here? How is it that we've decided that these are the things that we're going to do?
yeah.
I try to focus a lot on that how piece at the moment because I think by unpacking the how is how
Mm.
we really get to the crux of either the challenge or the opportunity that we're discussing. So anything that's framed from a how perspective, I'm into
Mm.
at the moment, Jono.
Yeah, yeah. No, I love a good how question, and even just taking a statement, stopping ourselves, and turning it into a how question is or any open ended question. But I love a good how question around when particularly for leaders when we're meeting with people and we're wanting to empower, which comes up a lot. If you can stop yourself from making a statement and turn it into a how do you see the blah 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 happening in the next few months, or change it into a question where you then sit back and listen to them. So I love a good how question. Do you have any
Yeah.
favorite quotes? A quote that's really stuck with you, or that you put up on the wall or on the screensaver of your phone or computer at some point? Any quotes that you really enjoy?
Um, Again, I'm really interested in this transition phase we're going through at the moment,
Hmm.
and we've been talking a lot about this idea that we're living, and I'm really interested in this idea of we're in post normal times. That the old ways of knowing things, the old normal, is dying, and a new
Mm-hmm.
normal is yet to be born. And so we talk about that, and I've been talking to my team a lot about that at the moment. Is the old normal that we had is gone, a new normal is yet to arrive, and that comes from a good friend of mine, Zia Sadar, who's also worth looking up. Sardar, Zia Sadar. He's done some really fabulous writing around this idea of post normal times that I
Mm.
recommend any leaders who are interested in this transition phase that we're going through at the moment
Yeah.
should look into. There's some fun frameworks to play with in there too.
Love it, love it. Zia Sadar. People can check him
Yeah.
out. I haven't had that recommendation either, so I always love a new recommendation for listeners to go and sink their teeth into and enjoy. What about work-life integration? I love that phrase. I've moved away from work-life balance. I'm definitely a
Yeah.
proponent more of work-life integration. But any advice to leaders who are listening on how to how to do work-life integration in a healthy way in 2022?
I think have a 4 and a 6-year-old, and you've got no choice.
Yeah,
It's when you've got toddlers, you have no choice but to just be completely consumed by being a parent and being available to them. Look, that's my work life integration, and I love that term. I haven't heard that before, mate. So I'm going to borrow that if you don't mind. But
oh,
you know,
I didn't
again,
come
this
up with it,
this
so go for it. It's not mine.
that conversation, I mentioned that conversation before about authentic leadership. In that same conversation, we're having this chat about, people used to bang on a lot about, oh, you're not allowed to send emails on the weekend or after 5 o'clock at night,
Mm,
because people start to feel that they're pressure to do the same, and I think those conversations need to just die, and I think we need to move beyond that, because if we've learned anything from COVID and anything from the push that's happening at the moment around flexible work environments and all those sorts of things, is that people will work and they'll be at their best when they want to be at their best. And I
hmm
think it's about finding that integration. And what I like to do is, as soon as I get off this podcast to you, I'm off to pick the boys up from school. Wednesday is my school pickup day,
Yeah.
and I make it known to everybody in the office, everyone across all of our offices. In fact, Liam does Wednesday afternoon pickups for Cassidy and Pat, because that's just what I do. Because that's what dads should do, and that's part of
hmm
my work life integration.
Yeah.
So I think it is about being really open and honest with all the people around you. That's what you're going to do, and if you lead in that way and you're really vocal about that intent, others pick up on it too. So I think it is about just prioritizing family first.
Yeah, I love that. My wife Liz and I, we have a 10-week-old little boy, Roman. So I feel,
Congratulations, man.
thank you. Yeah, I feel a similar sense of what you said about no choice but being present, because it's just so full on. That's been our last sort of 3 months of our lives. But I think it's great that leaders think like that, because I agree with what you said about people working at their best when they want to work. And I think more and more we need to trust people. We need to hire great people, hold them accountable, and do accountability really well, but trust them to go, you know what? Find the integration that works for you, because people will sacrifice all sorts of things and be up at all sorts of hours to get things done if it means that they're then free to do the 4 to 7 p.m. witching hour with, if they've got kids or whatever it is that they like for them in their life. I think we just need to realize that, yeah, people, we need to trust them more. And of course, there are some roles where that's really tricky because there's certain hours and shifts. And I think they're the industries that are going to have some of the biggest challenges around this. Is how do we really support and invest in people where there's less naturally flexible working arrangements? It's a big question.
Yeah, and I agree, and I think where we're moving to, particularly in a work environment, is that people are going to attach themselves to jobs, to businesses, to leaders that they feel a connection to purpose with, and if people are moved by that purpose, they're gonna work and they're gonna deliver, at 10 o'clock at night on a Wednesday night, after they've put the kids down and done all the things that they needed to do because they had to leave the office early to do that. And if that's what works for them, so be it. Like that's okay. And we need to acknowledge that and let that be okay. And at the same time, I think as leaders, we also need to learn how we can create spaces where there is no anxiety around that, and that be okay, that everybody has their
Mm,
own way of working, and we acknowledge that and accept that. You can see that happening at schools, right? Like, they're trying to have flexible curriculums and flexible teaching styles to
yeah.
suit, not just the majority but all people, all kids. And I think it's we need to catch up with that in the business world.
Yeah, I agree. One of my favorite things around this at the moment, which has really challenged my thinking, is Patrick Lencioni's working genius assessment. It's only new, like, well, it's probably coming up on a couple of years old. So it's a really interesting assessment that looks at how we get work done. And the reason it's really challenged me is they make an argument about burnout, and they say they use this analogy of a coffee cup, saying there's different types of work for all of us, and for some of us it's the type of work where it's really hot coffee, you put it in a cup and you put the lid on, and it's like that sort of work. I can do it stays hot, I can do that day in day out. The second type is you take the lid off and it starts cooling down. So it starts great, but if I'm
Yeah,
plugging away at that day in, day out, like nonstop, it gets old after a while. And then the third type, and I'm sort of giving a really quick overview here, but they talk about having a hole in the bottom of the coffee cup, and it's like if I'm doing that work, you got to realize when you're pouring the coffee in, it might start hot, but it's literally just pouring out the bottom because I'm. This is something
yeah,
they call it a working frustration, and their big idea, which is I find a really interesting take on work life integration and burnout. They say, what if people are burning out and say responding by saying, I can't check emails after 5 p.m. What if that comes from, rather than the quantity of work, what if it's actually the quality of work? So what they're saying is, instead of it being an issue that people were doing 80 hours, what if the issue was that 20 of their 40 hours were actually coffee cup with a hole in it sort of work? Whereas if you're doing
yeah.
coffee cup full with the lid on, oh boy, I can do a 100-hour week if I need to, if it's full on, and that just has to happen because of organizations, particularly if you're in senior leadership. That's sometimes the life, and that's the integration, right? There's times and seasons. But if you've got the lid on and it's hot and you're doing that type of work, people can do that and actually be very healthy even when they're doing bigger hours, as an example.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I like what you're saying there, and I think the onus is on us as leaders. And again, the theme for me is this transition period. Mentioned before about my friend's ear and his idea of the old orthodoxies dying and new ones yet to emerge. And I think that the tension then for us as leaders is to hold this space to say, how do we allow these flexible working environments and flexible working conditions to exist, but at the same time transition people to continue to deliver and to continue to meet KPIs or to deliver the outcomes that they've always been required to do, and then at the same time, not take advantage of that as well. If we're getting really good performance out of that, not to drive people further and create burnout when we've just found a sweet spot where we're getting good stuff. So there's a lot of it's really a shifting sands at the moment, and an interesting space for us all to be leading through. I think I like that though. The three coffee cups. That's cool.
Yeah, it is. It's a really fascinating framework, and I'm always paying attention to, whenever you recommend something, you watch to see how people respond, and a couple of things, like I rolled this out with an executive team recently, and it's the sort of assessment where you know if you do a good job facilitating it, you're always hoping that people find it helpful. But they've gone and rolled it out across their whole organization, and they did that within weeks because they found it so helpful for how they work. And so whenever something like that happens, I'm like, okay, maybe this is particularly helpful. The other one is a book, Never Split the Difference. That's one of my favorite books I've read recently by an FBI, a former FBI negotiator who sort of headed up international negotiation with terrorists for the FBI, and he takes everything he learned there and puts it into like some principles of how to negotiate in everyday life. And that book is also the same. Every time I give it to someone, they come back to me and they're like, that book messed with my brain in the best way. Like it's a so there that working genius is the other thing that's up there as a as
Working genius. Okay, well you buy me those books and I'll get you a copy of On the Road, mate.
deal. Yeah. I'm just in Brisbane, so let's make it happen. I will. I'll take you up
Yeah,
on
let's do it.
that. Okay, last question. If you could only give one piece of leadership advice to a young leader, what would you say to them?
Oh, I mean, this is loaded, and particularly a good one to end on, Jono. But it is slow down, and that's a Liam giving advice to a younger Liam. too. I think it is about slow down, and I've had the privilege of working and leading a lot of young people as they come through, and there is this desire to move fast, to learn fast, and to absorb as much as we can, as quick as we can. And I think that there's a lost art of just slowing down at the moment. The world is moving very fast. The world won't slow down. In fact, things are going to get faster. But I think that there is this sort of secret Tai Chi master practice of just working out how to slow down, breathing, and being a little bit more mindful in our practices. So for me, it's that slow down.
Love it. Such a great place to land. For those who've loved some of your advice and would like to follow you on social media or find out more about Comlink Australia, how can people connect with you online?
We're at comlinkaustralia.com.au, and I'm on most socials as well, Liam Mayo. LinkedIn's usually the best way to find me, though, and how most people find me at the moment.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank our listeners for tuning in. This episode has been chock full of great recommendations and so many that I hadn't heard of before. So that's one thing I've really enjoyed chatting with Liam, and I know there'll be a listener out there. You're just jogging by the river or on the train, and this was the episode that you just needed to hear. Maybe you're that fast-paced younger Liam, and you needed to hear that slow down. But don't forget, for our listeners, I also have the John O'White Leadership Podcast and the Leadership Question of the Day podcast, two other places you can go to continue to invest in your leadership. But I want to finish today by saying a massive thank you to you, Liam, for being so generous with your time and for being such a joy to spend time with. It's been great fun getting to know a bit of your story and chatting about leadership. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
It's been a pleasure, Jono. Thanks, mate.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the Leadership Conversations podcast as much as I did. If you're joining us for the first time, don't forget to check out consultclarity.org. That's our website, consultclarity.org. We have so many free resources on there, including our 7 Questions on Leadership series. We've had more than 1,500 leaders from all over the world in all different roles, in different industries, answer these 7 questions on leadership, and leaders give these in-depth answers around how they spend their time, a book that's been significant for them. It's just a gold mine. It's completely free to access, so go to consultclarity.org and look for that. We'd also love to interview you about your leadership. I believe your experience, your life, your context means that you have advice on leadership that other leaders can learn from. Yes, you, if you're going, not me. Well, no, I really believe you would have something to add. So if you're looking for a way to give back, it's completely free to get involved. And we would love to interview you through the 7 Questions on Leadership. You just go to consultclarity.org/7-questions-interest, or Google consultclarity.org 7 questions interest and fill out the form and get involved. We have a free resource on our website called the Leadership Survival Guide. It's a 57-page ebook, 10 world-class leaders giving their thoughts on leadership, and that's completely free. It's available on our homepage, consultclarity.org, right at the top, so make sure you go and get that and download it today. And we have a free daily email that you can subscribe to. We send this out to over 15,000 leaders from around the world. And it contains the highlights of content from our podcasts, our blogs, our books we're reading. It's got the best content, and it gives you exclusive, limited, early access to our masterclasses, workshops, new products, special offers. It's all for our subscribers. You can go to consultclarity.org/subscribe and join 15,000 other leaders. And my gift to you is to work really hard, particularly through the Leadership Conversations podcast. I have been blown away by the quality of the leaders, and I'm learning as much as anyone in doing these interviews. So I'm having a great time And my gift to you is to keep lining up the best leaders I can to invest in your leadership. Your gift to me, if you're finding this helpful, there is something that you could do that would help us out massively. And that is to write a review and to leave a rating for our podcast or wherever you're watching or listening to this. I can't tell you how much that helps us out. Also, subscribe or follow. It really does make a difference in helping us to help more leaders become everything they're meant to be. Another thing that means a lot to me personally is when I see our community share our content. So if you do share this or any other piece of content on social media, then thank you and please do that. And look for me, Jono White, or Clarity, and tag us in your post. Our team is always looking for posts to engage with from our community, and there's also a chance that we'll share your content to go beyond and share it with our followers. Last of all, you can check out my book. It's called Step Up or Step Out: How to Deal with Difficult People Even If You Hate Conflict. I wrote this book because 50% of the coaching sessions I have with leaders, this topic comes up again and again and again. And it's this idea of, how do I have this difficult conversation? How do I lead this person better when I'm finding them difficult? Or in some cases, you look and you say, I think I might be leading a difficult person. They're just quite difficult to lead, or I'm finding them quite difficult to lead. So there's a 3-step process that I unpack in Step Up or Step Out. And the amazing thing, and I've literally done this myself, and I've heard it anecdotally from other leaders as I've coached them, is that if you follow this process, you will see that person step up and change their behavior or make a decision, which is to step out some of the time. 95% of the time, people will step up or step out in just 4 weeks. And I stand by that. It's you have to read the book to understand, but I really do believe in it, and I've experienced it firsthand. It works. So you can go to Amazon, look up Step Up or Step Out Jono White, or store.consultclarity.org/book. Well, thank you so much for listening. We're going to be back with a new episode next time of the Leadership Conversations podcast. And I hope today has helped you to take another step towards becoming the leader you're meant to be. See you next time.